If you're a facilities manager at a university, you know students rely on the cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the occasional late-night snack. So when a dishwasher breaks down and dirty plates pile up, the mess hall can turn messy in the blink of an eye. Enter Grainger. With over 1 million industrial-grade products and fast delivery, the product you need now is never far away. So you can turn that dishwasher back into a lean, clean washing machine. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/audio.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you just email me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Really excited about today's show. Matt Birkbeck. You can find him at mattbirkbeck.com. You can find him on Instagram at Matt Birkbeck Author. He's got a YouTube channel, Matthew Birkbeck. And the book we're talking about today is The Life We Chose. But if you go to mattbirkbeck.com, every book this guy's written is right up our alley. If you like the Opperman Report, you're going to love Matt Birkbeck's shows. The Life We Chose, Sammy, Deconstructing Sammy, about Sammy Davis Jr., a book about a beautiful child. I believe that's the one that was turned into a Netflix documentary. The Quiet Dawn, about Russell Bufalino. We're going to be talking about him today. And Robert Durst, A Deadly Secret. Matt Birkbeck, are you there?
I'm here, Ed.
Hey, thank you so much, man. Before we get into your book, The Life We Chose, and all this stuff, Jimmy Hoffa, The Godfather, Trump, all this kind of stuff. Tell us about yourself. Who is Matt Birkbeck?
I have been a journalist for some 25 years now, mostly as an investigative journalist. I had worked at a couple of newspapers earlier in my career. I had worked for People magazine for a number of years as a correspondent, mostly human interest and true crime stories. I've written magazine pieces for Playboy, the New York Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, and I've written 7 books, including my latest one called The Life We Chose, which was published in July.
Yeah, when you go to mattbirkbeck.com, check out the articles, too. There's a lot of stuff in there that I know my audience would like to as well, including the litigation around Godfather of Soul, James Brown. We did a couple of shows about him, too, as well. Okay, The Life We Chose, Big Billy D'Elia and Russell Bufalino. Let's start with who was the Bufalino crime family? Russell Bufalino. You wrote a book about him, too, The Quiet Dawn.
I did. So I learned about Russell Bufalino when I was a newspaper reporter at the Morning Call in the early 2000s, and which is in Pennsylvania. It's one of the larger newspapers in Pennsylvania. And I worked on a series of investigative stories when Pennsylvania introduced casino gambling, and it was a pretty corrupt affair, which you could probably do 2 shows on. But that aside, one of the folks who was looking for a casino license had been connected to the Bufalino family, which is this crime family that was based in northeastern Pennsylvania, but whose tentacles swept across the country. And it was run by Russell Bufalino, who was arguably the most important and influential gangster, organized crime figure of the 20th century. Most people, when they think of the mob, they'll think of the New York families, they'll think of Chicago, they'll think of Florida, New Orleans, even Los Angeles, perhaps. Few people knew about Russell. I wrote about him in 2013 in my book, The Quiet Dawn. And then in 2020, I got an email from a fellow by the name of William D'Elia, or actually a representative of Mr. D'Elia, asking if I'd be interested in doing a book. And I was floored because Billy D'Elia had been the former head of the Buffalino family. He took over when Russell died in 1994. But what made Billy really important was that for almost 30 years before Buffalino's death, Billy had been Russell's so-called son and confidant, and he knew everything. He knew Russell was involved in Cuba with Fidel Castro and what was going on there in the 1950s with the casinos and whatnot. Russell was involved with the Kennedys. Russell was very involved with Teamsters Union and was a chief suspect in the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. And Russell was considered, when you think of the Mafia Commission, Russell was so important that, according to Billy and some other folks, Russell, although he had never been a member of the commission, was above the commission. So to kind of give you some insight into who Buffalino was. So when Billy D'Elia had been arrested in 2006, and every law enforcement agency wanted to talk to him about his life with Buffalino, and Billy never spoke about it. He refused to. FBI, Homeland Security, U.S. Secret Service, New York City Terrorism Task Force, IRS, postal inspectors, everyone wanted to talk to him, and he wouldn't budge. So that's why when I saw the email in 2020 and Billy wanted to talk, I just jumped off my seat, sent out an email, yes, I would, and that started me on this journey that led me to do the life we chose.
Yeah, the 2006 charges, that was like money laundering, right?
Yeah, he was arrested for money laundering, and then later there were additional charges that included attempting to kill a witness. Right. He
hired an informant to no, why did he ever come out? He must know guys to do these kind of jobs for him, right, at that level. What made him hire an informant to do that job?
Well, he didn't necessarily hire an informant. He had been caught up in what Billy claims to be this whole casino thing. This one individual that I mentioned earlier who was seeking a casino license in Pennsylvania was a billionaire with incredible political connections. And he had been, let's call him an associate of the Buffalino family, going back to the 1970s. And he basically wanted, in his casino application, he didn't want any reference to that at all. He wanted to wash it away. And so, according to Billy, part of washing that away was getting Billy out of his life too, and that led to charges against Billy. So it was money laundering and whatnot. And then he found out that one of his closest friends had been wearing a wire and had been an informant, and that's where that other charge came from later on. That charge was ultimately dropped, and Billy ended up spending in total about 6 years in prison, and he was ultimately released, and some years went by. He saw the movie The Irishman,
right,
that was on HBO in 2019, which was about Frank Sheeran, who was one of Buffalino's henchmen, and Sheeran has long maintained, or actually over the past 40 years before his death, he maintained he killed Jimmy Hoffa, and he actually did a book about it that came out after his death. But Billy knew the truth about that, and it infuriated him, along with a number of other things. So Billy decided he wanted to talk, and for some reason, I was the one that was lucky enough to get the email.
It's
so
funny. I was going to ask you about that because there's a scene at the end of that movie with De Niro where they say, "What are you keeping quiet for? Everybody involved is gone." When D'Elia saw that, he must have jumped out of the seat. What do you mean we're all gone? I'm right here. Is that what motivated him?
Yeah, because he knew that the story was false.
Right.
So Billy had been with, just his background, Billy had been with Buffalino beginning in 1966, and the book isn't, it's really heavy on a lot of details, and it's really heavy on a lot of explosive headlines, but at its core, it's a very intimate story. It's a father and son story, with this mob background, and it shows how basically Russell kind of drew Bill into his life. Billy wasn't born into this. As a matter of fact, he had graduated college and was thinking of becoming an accountant. And, he was drawn to Buffalino and raised by Buffalino in this mob life through his 1920s, and it opened this entire world, which you'll see in the book, to Billy, that included not just introductions to some of the biggest gangsters in the country, but we're talking about some of the greatest sports celebrities, entertainment figures. There's scenes in the book with Johnny Unitas, the old Baltimore Colts quarterback. There's scenes in the book with Liberace. Russell used to interview performers before they played at the Copacabana in New York in the 60s and 70s. They used to come and get Russell's blessing before they would perform. You see you see Billy with Jimmy Hoffa, and you see what went on at the time that Hoffa disappeared, and also you see who did not kill Jimmy Hoffa, and that included Frank Sheeran. So Billy was a witness to history. The first part of his life with Russell was more of an observer, as a fly on the wall. And then when Russell went to prison in 1978, it was Billy who took over the family on Russell's behalf. And then you see Billy as the participant, as the guy who becomes the guy who fills in Russell's shoes. Russell was the negotiator across the country when it came to mob problems. And Billy took that over, and he became the mob's fixer, and a very good one too. So it's a very expansive book, but it's a book that is in some sense historical, in that we go way back, like I said, to 1950s Cuba, and revolution there, and Buffalino's, and Billy confirms Buffalino's participation there, his how he was recruited by the CIA in these so-called CIA mafia plots. So Billy, we ended up speaking for about 2 years. That's how long we did interviews for. And it was just a treasure trove of information.
What does he have to say then? What is the real story that happened with Hoffa, if the Irishman is inaccurate?
So just the short version is that, as most people who are familiar with the Hoffa story, he got out of prison in 1971. He was not allowed, per the agreement for his release, to run for the presidency again for 10 years. He claimed he didn't know about it until his release. He was furious. He wanted the leadership back. It was his union. He started it. But the mob had become comfortable with Frank Fitzsimmons, who had taken over. It was one of Hoffa's top lieutenants, and it was Fitzsimmons that was running the Teamsters at that point. And he, unlike Hoffa, the Teamsters had originated millions in loans to a variety of people, including organized crime. And he always insisted and demanded that they be paid back. He charged interest and they were paid back. Under Fitzsimmons, somewhat close to 40% of the mob loans were not paid back. They did not want to change that arrangement. So as Jimmy Hoffa pushed and pushed, it infuriated members of organized crime. Jimmy Hoffa and Russell Buffalino were best of friends. Buffalino had been involved with Hoffa from the 1940s. He had placed his cousin, William Buffalino, with Hoffa at that time. William Buffalino became the general counsel of Teamsters, which is what gave Russell his power. And Russell's telling Hoffa to just back off, go retire. And Hoffa didn't want to listen to that. And ultimately, when things got to the point involving Buffalino, when he was outed by a congressional committee, or actually in a newspaper story, as being having been recruited by the CIA as part of these so-called mafia plots to kill Fidel Castro. And Jimmy Hoffa was the one that the CIA went to get to Buffalino. That's when Buffalino said, "That's it, I can't protect them anymore." And that's when, several weeks later, that's when Hoffa disappeared. Sheeran later claimed that he killed Hoffa, but as Billy shows, actually as he tells, there was a meeting just a few days after Hoffa disappeared. Sheeran had been very close to Jimmy Hoffa, and he was furious over Hoffa's demise, and he wanted to kill the people that he believed had been responsible for Hoffa's disappearance, and that included Tony Provenzano and Tony Salerno from New York. And so it was Bufalino who held a meeting in New York at a restaurant and to get Sharon to come in and to promise them he would not harm them. And that's what happened. So Billy was at that meeting. So Billy knew that Sharon didn't kill Hoffa. And it wasn't, and then later in the 1990s, Sharon says he's going to write a book. He asks Billy for permission. Billy gives him permission, says, don't mention me, and don't release the book until Russell's widow passes away, because Russell had just died. And the first drafts of the book, Sharon claims other people killed Jimmy Hoffa. And Billy actually has first drafts of the book. It wasn't until Billy had gotten together with a new writer, a guy by the name of Charlie Brandt, that the story changed, and it was Sharon who claimed on his deathbed that he killed Hoffa. And Bill, according to Bill, it was nothing but fiction, and that's what basically set him to reach out to me. And that was part of it. He wanted to correct the record on a number of different things, and that's what he ultimately did.
Then what would be the motive for Sharon to make up this story, just for the money of the book? And then what would be the motive of someone of the stature of Scorsese to promote a false narrative there?
All right. So to answer your first question, yes, Sharon had no money. Billy used to take Sharon around. Sharon got out of prison around 1994 or so, and he was broke. And for instance, people had owed Sharon money from years earlier,
right?
And he asked Billy if he can collect it for him, and Billy did that. And then Billy would take Sharon with him. Billy was in Philadelphia at this point in the mid-1990s, and he would take Sharon out with him, and basically he'd go sit him in a bar and let him drink all day, and then Billy would go out and do his business and come back and pick him up. So they had been friends for many, many years. They continued to be friends. When Sharon changed his story, it was for the money. He wanted to leave money behind for his family. My understanding is that, and actually Martin Scorsese says this, you'll see in interviews, they didn't really care whether or not the book was factual or not. They just wanted to make a great story. So, and that's what they did. I mean, the movie came out. It was very good. It was a little bit long for my taste, but it was good, of course. But, according to
I would have cut out that stuff with Bo Dietl, man. That was annoying as hell with the watermelon.
Yeah, it was,
What the hell was that?
A lot of Scorsese's movies are long these days.
Yeah.
Perhaps a bit, way long. And, but they didn't care. I mean, whether it was true or not. They had a book. They had a movie. They went with it. I think De Niro even, when they talked about the accuracy of the book and the accuracy of their claims, they didn't really, attest to the facts in the book. I don't even think Charlie Brandt did a lot of publicity when the movie came out. They kind of kept him in the shadows. When fiction becomes the fact, that's what you go with, and in this case, that's what they went with.
So then what about D'Elia? Does he want to have a tell-all about that situation and describe exactly what happened?
He did, and that's the life we chose. It's in the book.
Then who does he say did the murder? And where is Hoffa's body?
So Billy said two things. The thing about Billy, in interviewing him over the course of 2 years, was that he told me what he knew, and he would not. And if he didn't know anything, he would say, "I don't know the answer to that."
Right.
He knows who ordered the murder of Jimmy Hoffa, and it came down to Tony Provenzano, it came down to Tony Salerno, and it also came down to Russell Bufalino. They would not. Russell was that powerful. Salerno and Provenzano would not have acted without Bufalino's blessing, and Bufalino gave the okay. To take a step back, when Bufalino was outed in June of 1995 by Time Magazine, which reported on his association or having been recruited by the CIA for these CIA plots that Congress was investigating at that time, once that was in the news, just 3 weeks later, other folks who had been recruited by the CIA had also been subsequently murdered. Sam Giancana from Chicago, who was scheduled to testify, he died 2 weeks later. Hoffa disappears, and then Johnny Roselli, who had been a key figure, he's found dead, hacked up in a 55-gallon drum in Florida a year later. And he had testified once before the committee, and he was about to testify again. So Bufalino, at the end of the day, finally gave in to other mob pressure for all his own personal reasons to get rid of Jimmy Hoffa. Who actually killed him? Billy doesn't know the answer to that question. The best guess is that it was farmed out to folks in Detroit, where Bufalino had family contacts, and that they did it. As far as what happened to Hoffa's body, Billy says that he has no doubt that immediately after he died, it was incinerated, like within 15 minutes.
Gotcha.
At any number of funeral homes that the mob owned in the area, because it makes absolutely no sense. I mean, with all the theories going around over the years since Hoffa's disappearance, it's been almost 50 years now. He was buried in New Jersey somewhere under Giant Stadium, under the New Jersey Turnpike. It makes zero sense to take the body of the most recognizable labor leader, not just in the country but in the world, and take it across state lines just to bury it somewhere else. It made no sense. And according to Billy, they just took it and cremated it immediately, and that was that.
Now, for your book about Bufalino, the Quiet Don, did you get to interview Russell Bufalino for that book, or was he dead already?
He was gone some 20 years.
Gotcha.
By then, so that book, I wish I had gotten Billy when I did that book, because that was based on mostly government documents, FBI files. I had some sources that were close to the Bufalinos, nothing like a Billy Belia. I mean, Billy was it. I mean, I don't think there aren't too many writers or authors that get to actually sit down with a mob boss and interview them and ultimately do a book with them. I mean, it may have happened a handful of times, and in this case, I guess, I was fortunate now to be one of them. With the Quiet Don, it was basically piecing together Russell's life based on the information that we had at that time. What Billy adds is just so many other details about Russell. He confirms a number of things that I had written in the book, particularly Russell being, during his days as a CIA, not an informant, he was recruited to help them.
Asset.
When the Bay of Pigs invasion, Russell was on a boat with a couple of CIA guys off the coast of Cuba. Russell had left behind. When Russell left Cuba, Russell had interest in casinos in Cuba. When he was very good friends with the dictator there, Fulgencio Batista. He was such good friends that Batista would send his children to Pennsylvania to vacation during the summers under Bufalino's protection. And so, but when Batista was losing that civil war there with Castro, just to kind of play the odds a bit, Bufalino sent arms to Fidel Castro, and with the promise that if he won, he would leave the casinos intact. And of course, that didn't happen. Bufalino fled, but he had to leave behind what today would be around $1 million. And so the CIA said to him back then, when we go in, we need your help with logistics, with roads, this and that, and when we go in, you can go and get your money. And Bufalino had agreed to that. So during the Bay of Pigs invasion, Bufalino was in a boat with two CIA guys off the coast of Cuba, waiting to go in. It had been somewhat controversial when I wrote that, but Billy confirmed it. Billy said that when they used to hang out at this defense contractor. They had offices there, believe it or not, the Bufalinos. And the place was called Medico Industries. And they would joke with Russell, "Hey, Russell, when are we going to Cuba to get that money of yours that you left behind?" And this is back in the 1970s or so. So that story was true, and Russell spoke to Billy about that, and that's in the book.
How
that
does,
was an interesting revelation.
yeah, how does Frank Sturgis fit into that? Because he was also helping to arm Castro at one point, and then switch sides. Was he under Buffalino's power and control?
The whole I've looked into it, and the whole CIA thing is so murky.
I know, yeah.
And it's so difficult. It really is. I mean, you probably know this. It's so difficult to try to figure out what's what. I found documentation where they were going to recruit Russell to topple the dictator of Haiti.
Right.
Since they lost Cuba, they wanted to put casinos first in Mexico, and then they looked to Haiti, and they were going to pay Russell to get hitmen to kill the dictator there.
Well, you want to hear something? Because I hate to interrupt it, but I've interviewed Frank Sturgis' nephew, Jim Hunt, who was a law professor. This guy's no slouch. And he helped Frank Sturgis make napalm bombs. Frank Sturgis had his own B-25 bomber, and he went and bombed the palace in Haiti over a gambling debt. Okay, so that fits right into what you're talking about.
Wow.
I know, right?
So I tried to look as best as I could into those ties.
Yeah.
Obviously, it also leads you to the Kennedy assassination, John Kennedy. The roads lead there. I had mentioned that, Russell's ties to different organized crime figures, and calls that Russell received from Mexico shortly before Kennedy's assassination. But obviously, there's just no one's ever been able to put that part together. Many of the records are still sealed, without anyone still left alive. Most of these.
So does DeLeo know anything about any first-hand information about that?
He doesn't know it. No, he doesn't know anything firsthand. But I did ask him about Kennedy and about Russell, and Billy had his thoughts on it. And it was something I did not want to include it in the book because I didn't want to take away, because there's so many different theories. I will say this. I have looked into this a lot. It was a conspiracy. I firmly believe it was a conspiracy. It involved the CIA. It involved, to a degree, organized crime. There was a second, if not a third shooter. I didn't write about it. It's just an opinion of mine formulated over years of just looking at documents and whatnot and interviewing people. Billy believes pretty much the same thing that I said based on what he knows. He didn't come out and say, yeah, Russell told me that he killed Kennedy.
Right.
That never happened. That did not happen. But there's enough out there to draw up some conclusions. But there's so many. There have been so many books on it, so many articles on it, so many investigations on it. It's hard to give an opinion on it without someone looking at it and basically snickering. So I didn't want to even go there with the book.
Exactly, information overload, and even like with the Hoffa movie, the Irishman movie, I saw the movie. I know exactly what happened. I saw the movie. So it's just so much information overload with the whole JFK thing. But like you said, though, if he was involved in all that CIA stuff and funding both sides, he would definitely be in the mix there with that group. The Life We Chose by Matt Birkbeck. Great stuff in this book, and check out also, too, the first one, not the first one, but the first one on this topic, The Quiet Dawn, about Russell Buffalino. How about, you mentioned in here that D'Elia was involved with the filming of The Godfather?
So, no, it was Russell.
Okay.
So Billy was still an apprentice at this time. He had started with Russell in 1966 and then became his driver and bodyguard. But now, as their relationship is developing, Russell's introducing Billy to everyone as my son, which I said earlier opened up so many doors. I mean, people now pay Billy the respect that a son of a major mob figure would get. Russell, when the Godfather started filming, or was about to film, there was a lot of issues going down in Lower Manhattan involving the unions. So Russell was a huge figure within the Teamsters union, and the Teamsters just stopped working, and there were all kinds of stuff. There was all kinds of things going on at that time, which had been documented before. but Russell had basically been a part of, he was brought in quietly and secretly, which was Russell's way, to help rectify the issues with The Godfather and allow that to get going, as well as this new Italian-American organization that Joe Colombo was involved with and started. But according to Billy, it was Russell that was really behind it, and that Colombo was acting on Russell's orders. And so he and Joe Colombo had been friends for a very long time. And so with The Godfather, Russell's influence was far and wide in that he, I think there's one story that's been out there about Al Martino playing the so-called Frank Sinatra character,
right?
The singer, and he had wanted the role. Francis Ford Coppola didn't want to give it to him. It was Russell who ultimately got it for him. Russell also tutored Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando, in portraying Vito Corleone, was looking for someone to talk to, a mob leader, to just to discuss what a mob boss does, how they act, their mannerisms, things like that. And people quietly pointed him to Russell. And he ended up meeting with Bufalino several times. There's this funny scene in the book where Russell and Billy are in an office in Pennsylvania, and the phone rings, and Billy picks it up, and the voice on the other end goes, "Hi, this is Marlon Brando calling for Mr. Bufalino." And Billy didn't believe it. He turns to Russell and goes, "Hey, there's some guy saying he's Marlon Brando. He wants to talk to you." And Russell says, "Give me that phone." And then he starts talking to him as if they were old friends. "Hey, Marlon, how you doing?" So there are other actors in the movie. Lenny Montana, who played Luca Brasi, was a member of the Colombo family, but they were also working with the Bufalinos. And Lenny Montana was a guy from Brooklyn or Staten Island who was muscle within the family, and he was there to protect one of the Colombo figures that was hanging around on the lot. There were a lot of mob guys that were there. And they just saw him, and then they needed someone to play Luca Brasi, and they saw him standing there, and they said, "Hey, let's try this guy." And that's how he got on. There are other figures. There are several other actors with major roles that are in the film, that are in The Godfather. The opening wedding scene, you see dozens of people there, if not hundreds, and many of them are members of the Bufalino family. So they had a pretty significant role in terms of The Godfather. First with this Italian-American association that was pushing back against the film, and then with the actual making of the film, in terms of actors and, as I mentioned earlier, the influence that Bufalino had with Marlon Brando. So I thought that was really interesting, coming from Billy.
That's another question I have for you, because you were talking about how before you were saying how this was like such a gift to you, to be able to talk to one of these mob bosses, at the end of his life, and be able to interview the guys talking, to write a book. Like I grew up in Staten Island, right? I know it sounds like I came from England, but I came from Staten Island.
Okay. I lived on Staten Island.
Where?
I lived off of Victory Boulevard.
Okay, not too far. Yeah, off of Richmond Avenue and Lamoka, by Embry Road.
Okay,
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, Victory Boulevard. You're about a few years younger than me, but I'm 62 years old. When I was a young man in Staten Island around that time, we were taught there's no such thing as mafia. Okay, it doesn't even exist. Forget that. It doesn't even exist, right? And then we were always taught to, you keep your mouth shut. You don't say anything, right? With Mr. D'Elia here, at the end of his career, he made a deal, right? And he testified?
He did, but it wasn't a deal in which he would testify against other organized crime figures.
Okay.
They did want him to talk about other organized crime figures. That he did not do. The person that he testified against, one person, and that was this businessman that I mentioned earlier. His name is Louis de Naples, and he had been friends with de Naples for 30 years. And he was the guy that wanted the casino license that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
The government had all kinds of evidence that pointed to the relationship that Billy had with Louis de Naples. They had video, they had audio, they had photographs. So when they brought Billy before a grand jury, he wasn't going to deny that he knew the man because they had all this evidence. Had he denied it, he would have been charged for perjury. So what Bill said was, yes, I knew the man. Yes, we had been friends for 30 years. Yes, we were in business together. And yes, the government had information on this business, and this business. And what Bill did was that he confirmed that he was that. That's all Bill did as far as him testifying against anyone, any figures. He would not. They did want him to talk about other mob figures. He wouldn't do that. Bill, I will tell you this, Bill is a very, very, very old school mobster. It was so hard getting him. He wanted to do a book. He wanted to talk to me. But the first 3 months or so, 4 months, he wouldn't tell me anything. The only thing he would tell me is how much he loved Russell. Mm. And it was just, we kept going around in circles, So, Bill, tell me about this. Bill, tell me that. He wouldn't give me anything. And finally, I would sit him down and I said, listen, Bill, if you want to do this book, you're going to have to open up a bit. That was him, basically. That was Bill being Bill, not wanting to talk, not wanting to give away the store. Ultimately, I think also what was important was he began to become comfortable with me. And, one day he just, he dropped, I think it was the Marlon Brando story. He started feeling comfortable, and I think it was, I think that was the first one. There was a story in the book, I don't recall exactly, it may have been that one, in which he just, out of nowhere, it came up. And then he talks about Donald Trump and his relationship with Trump and how he became Michael Jackson's co-manager, Billy. And he's telling all these, wild stories. They were great. And they were true. He became, Trump wanted Jackson to perform at one of his casinos in 1988, and Jackson's manager was a guy by the name of Frank DeLeo, who was actually in the film Goodfellas. He played the small squat guy that they call Tookie, the cab stand owner. Okay. And so these other mob guys, so they told Trump no. And so Trump, not wanting to take no for an answer, goes to these huge mob heavyweights in California and says, I'll give you $1 million if you can get Michael Jackson to agree to perform at my casino. And so they call up DeLeo, the mob guys, and say, hey, we're going to take over Jackson's contract. So DeLeo, who had connections to Pittsburgh mobsters, calls them, but they weren't big enough to deal with these guys from L.A. So they introduce DeLeo to Billy. Frank DeLeo to Billy. And so there's this meeting in New York, and these two mob guys who want the contract, they come bursting in, and they tell Frank DeLeo, we're taking over, there's nothing you're going to do about it. Billy's sitting there. He apparently had a newspaper in front of him, and when he put the newspaper down, that covered his face. The two mob guys knew Billy. They knew who he was. And they said, oh, no, you're here? And then Billy tells them in no uncertain terms that they are not getting the contract. They offered him half the Trump money. Billy said no, and he threw them out. And then Frank DeLeo was ecstatic and couldn't thank Bill enough. But Bill turns around and says to him, no, this isn't over yet. I'm now your partner. And Billy became Michael Jackson's co-manager. And that was the summer of the Bad Tour. And Billy went on tour with them. Technically, he was called a security consultant. Behind the scenes with Frank DeLeo, he was his co-manager. And there's a picture in the book with Billy and Michael Jackson and Frank DeLeo at a concert in Pittsburgh. So that was one of several dealings that Bill had with Donald Trump. But then, as I said, once these stories started flowing, and he started to give me more and more about his life, particularly with Bufalino, that's when I saw this story really come together and this book come together. And it became such a unique story.
Back to Jackson for a second, because later on, Michael Franzese was managing or promoting one of his tours with Al Sharpton, none other than Al Sharpton, who's probably the most crooked guy in this whole bunch. But you're telling me that Michael Jackson was just getting tossed around from one mob guy to another, just with no say in the matter?
so organized crime had huge influence in entertainment at that time. Billy became, as I said earlier, the so-called fixer or the negotiator.
Right.
And Billy would come in. He'd go cross country, and whenever there were disputes, and there were several examples in the book with major artists, they would bring Billy in, and Billy would make a decision. It's kind of similar, in my 2008 book on Sammy Davis Jr., Deconstructing Sammy. Sammy had 2 lawyers in his career, and they were both mob lawyers, and they ruined him. The second one particularly, a guy by the name of John Comacca out of Cleveland. And when Sammy died, he was $15 million in debt. He died destitute. It's because of this lawyer and what the mob had done to him. So, and that was, Sammy died in 1991. So this is the same period. So Billy knew NFL owners. The owner of Philadelphia Eagles was a degenerate gambler, Leonard Toews, and Billy would see him in Atlantic City, and Toews would borrow money off him. Billy was a Shylock, so to speak, in Atlantic City. Toews would run out of money. Billy would give him $400,000. Toews would lose it within 20 minutes, come back for more. Ed DiBartolo was another gambler. DiBartolo's had his issues from the 49ers.
Okay.
And actually had been pardoned by Trump for one of those issues. And Billy had to go. Folks asked Bill if he could intercede and collect a $200,000 gambling debt. Billy wasn't a guy that ran around collecting money. He was a guy that got involved in big ticket issues. And, he tells the story of how he got $200,000 wrapped in cellophane, 2 bricks of money, $100,000 each, that DiBartolo owed the Philadelphia mob. And so, Bill was the guy that people called to take care of big issues, and it involved, almost every walk of life.
And what is he doing today?
Who's that?
Billy. Billy.
Oh, Billy's retired. Billy's something like 77 now.
It's not that old.
Well, for a guy that was involved in organized crime throughout his entire adult life up until 2006, and then he spent another 6 years in prison.
Yeah.
He's got grandkids. He's been married since 1971. He lays low, and doesn't, let's just call him retired.
Now, how is his opinion of the book? Is he happy, pleased with the way the book came out?
Oh, yeah, no, he was he was happy. Yeah, it was difficult. Bill actually did a couple of interviews, one of them with Fox, Fox News, when the book came out in July. And even that, when we recorded the interviews, and for him, and he sat down for it, you could see it was difficult for him to talk about his life. He had become very comfortable with me. He was starting over now, with a whole, with a new group of reporters. On my website, if you go to mattberkbeck.com, there are a couple of interviews that Bill did do. He did a national interview with Fox. He did a local interview with the local NBC station, I think. He did a couple of them. And you can see him talking. He's soft-spoken. He's very, very smart. Bill would have been successful in any other industry had he chosen it. But this wasn't, the whole media thing wasn't comfortable for him at all. He basically was pleased with the book and let the book speak for him and, tell the story of his life and that of Russell Bufalino.
And do you think the reason he picked you is because he saw the Quiet Dawn book about Russell Bufalino and he was impressed by that and he figured you were the guy?
Billy knew me from, I hadn't met him before, but he knew me from when I was reporting, when I was a newspaper reporter, and I was writing about this casino situation that we talked about earlier in Pennsylvania. Right. Back in like 2004, 5, 6. And I had done a number of, investigative reports exposing just how corrupt this was. This went all the way up to the governor, who was Ed Rendell, and the state Supreme Court, which was in on it too. And so I covered Billy when he had been arrested, because Billy was a key figure then, having known this businessman. It was, it was huge news in Pennsylvania. It even connected, a former U.S. senator And it also connected to the Secret Service. I mean, I had gotten a call from the Secret Service once when I was on vacation with my family, and I got a phone call from them, basically asking me not to write about them anymore with this case, because it was exposing. The way I put it together, it was exposing ongoing investigations, which was my job, basically just to write, but it was very sensitive to them. So there's a lot of stuff that was going on behind the scenes that even I wasn't privy to. But Billy had his attorney, who I knew his attorney, and it was through his attorney that I had communicated with Bill a couple of times. But I'd never met the man, and I didn't meet him until 2020, a week or two after they emailed me. And initially I wasn't even sure why, if this was true or not. I was, all these thoughts were going through my head. Did he really want to talk to me about a book? Was he mad at me over? Was he mad at me over something? I mean, this is the former head of a major crime family. Yeah. He knew. I mean, he did business with John Gotti. He knew Gotti really well. I mean, he knew all the New York guys. Billy. I mean, he basically, Russell ran. When anything needed to be done in New York, they went to Russell. So is there something else untoward that, might happen to me? I don't know. I mean, all these thoughts were bouncing around, but, being the journalist, being who I am, I went and met him. And he's, initially when you meet him, he could be an intimidating guy. He's tall. He's fearsome looking.
Even at this age.
Oh, yeah. When you see his photograph, now when you listen to him talk, like if you go watch one of the videos or the interview, you'll see it on my website. He's soft-spoken, so you may not be, and he'll even say, hey, there's nothing to worry about talking to me. And it turned out when we were talking, he was very easy to talk to. He was very, engaging, tells really good stories. Again, I would push and ask him questions about this and that. If it was something he knew, he'd tell me. If there were things I was hoping he knew, and he'd just tell me that, no, I didn't know it. Okay, we put that away. But he, once we got through our initial conversations, it was very, very easy to talk to him. And, so he's like I said, the book is, his story is it's a real inside look on organized crime.
Yeah, once again, The Life We Chose by Matt Birkbeck, and check out the reviews on Amazon. The book is rave reviews, making headlines all over the place. Matt Birkbeck did not have to come on this show to tell us about this book. It's already selling off the shelf. But now back to the whole thing about Billy D'Elia writing a book and the testimony thing. Okay, I guess the justification. Well, the guy was a civilian. It was kind of a civilian kind of thing. But has his relationships in that world been diminished by him writing a book, and talking about, or is that nowadays nobody cares anymore? You got podcasters all over the place doing this stuff, but his personal life, no issues.
When the book came out, he took the book and he sent it out to people that he knew that were still alive.
Gotcha.
Just to let immediately he did that, just to let them know, hey, the book is out. Here you go. He knows people everywhere in New York, and we're talking about, major power brokers in organized crime that he had worked with. And he sent the book out. Here, read it. You have any questions? You have any issues? Call me. Again, and he gave the reasoning. I want to set the record straight about Russell, and he also wanted to set the record straight about himself. Particularly in terms of, some folks had called him quote unquote a rat for testifying. But he wanted to clear the air that he testified only against this one person because the government had its evidence, and there was nothing he could do about that. As far as anyone else, he never spoke about anybody and never would. And, my understanding is that everyone gave him his blessing. He has no, you see these guys doing podcasts today. It's a completely different mob today. Some of them have, 1 million followers. It's big business. Organized crime on social media has become very big business. You've got big guys like Mike Franchise, who has over 1 million followers on YouTube. You've got other guys, Joey Merlino from Philadelphia, who's now started a podcast.
Nick Gravano.
Yes, and even Sammy the Bull Gravano.
I wonder if they have to kick back any money to anybody for doing those shows. I wonder how that works, you know?
Billy knew Gravano. He didn't have a high opinion of him.
Yeah.
Billy knew Joey Merlino really well. Merlino was at the wedding of Bill's daughter in 1999. Billy was in the middle of all of that turbulence in Philadelphia in the mid-1990s between Merlino and John Stampa. And so, Bill was comfortable with it. He sent it out. Guys read it. There were no issues. And I'm sure he was pleased by that.
Gotcha. We've been talking to Matt Birkbeck. You go to mattbirkbeck.com. The book we've been talking about is The Life We Chose. It's kind of a partnership book to it called The Quiet Dawn about Russell Bufalino. But if you go to mattbirkbeck.com and check out these books, Deconstructing Sammy, I got to have you come back about that. Now, you were involved with a Netflix documentary about the photograph, The Girl in the Photo, I think it's called.
It was called Girl in the Picture. It came out 2 summers ago, 2022, and it's based on my books, A Beautiful Child and Finding Sharon. And My Beautiful Child came out in 2004, and it was an incredible story about a young girl who lived this tortuous life with a serial killer / pedophile, and who died, and no one knew her identity. And what I did was wrote a book and hoping that we could find her identity along with the FBI, and we did. And that's the foundation of the Netflix film, which actually, within one day of its release in July of 2022, it became their #1 movie in the world. So folks really were drawn in by the girl's name was Sharon Marshall, and they were really drawn into her story. So it's called Girl in the Picture.
Yeah, all stuff right up our alley here. Another book, The Bizarre, Chilling Story of Robert Durst, The Deadly Secret. And if you go to mattbirkbeck.com, his articles, too, as well, are right up our alley. Denny McClain, Legendary Pitcher or Mafia Traitor. The Real Life of FBI Sting, American Hustle. Years After Death, The Battle of James Brown Estate rages on. I had that woman on who was raped by James Brown. We had her on a couple of times. So all great stuff here by Matt Birkbeck. mattbirkbeck.com. Matt, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed.
Good night.